Hello everybody and welcome back to the 5th episode of Tides of Lore. My name is Robert Silva and I'm one half of your host team today, joined as always by my good friend Tim. How you doing today, Tim?
Oh, I'm fantastic, man. This game has got me by the grip, man. We did a full Gnomer run yesterday with the guild. Shout out Get Crit on. It was a fun time. I know you hate Gnomer, but I had a really good time.
I do hate Gnomer, and honestly, I didn't think you guys would be able to do it. Swiper was like, what, level 28? And
Did it?
No disrespect to Swiper's name, but I thought for sure that this, like you said, it was going to turn a 3-hour dungeon into a 6-hour dungeon.
We finished that shit in like an hour. It was not bad.
I know.
I was worried.
Cruising.
I was worried too, but he got from 26 to 28. Most of them, it's really weird in Classic. Like, it starts out level 26 mobs, right? The mobs before the dungeon were gray to me. And then they, like, progressively, like, the last boss is 34. So it's a weird dynamic in Classic.
But I'm proud of you guys. You did it. Any drops, Tim?
I got a blue axe. You know the, or blue mace, excuse me. You know the, what, Feral Druids farm? Actually, it's in...
Oh, their ideal item?
It's in my inventory, so it's really weird. It's called the Manual Proud Pummeler. It increases your attack speed by 50% for 30 seconds, but it only has 3 charges. So, like, Feral Druids will literally farm this level 30 or 29 item, and for, like, a raid, use it 3 times, and then they have, like, not a million, but, like, 10 in their inventory, and that is some degenerate gameplay. I'm not about that, but I did.
Yeah.
I did get it on the Paladin. Nothing. Got some cool quest drops for healing for the Paladin, but nothing else other than that.
Well, that's enough of what we're doing. Tim, last time we spoke about the Rise of the Dragon aspects and their escapades in the War of the Ancients. What do we remember from last time?
I remember Big Daddy Galakron eating everything in his path. His flapping of the wings felt like earthquakes to Azeroth. I remember the progression of the aspects from when they were small to very big, and then we're just talking about the different dragon flights that there were.
Yes, indeed, and what eventually would lead to the downfall of the Black Dragon flights as well, or the Black Dragon flight. And in this episode, we're going to be moving on to something quite similar, except this time for the War of the Ancients, we're going to focus much more on the Night Elf story. We did briefly mention at the end of the last one, like Azara and Xavius, as well as the Well of Eternity, because we needed to, go over them a little bit just so that you have an idea of how the Legion's even coming here. But now we're going to get into much more detail about the conflict between the Highborn, the Night Elves, and mostly a lot about Malfurion, Stormrage, and Tyrande Whisperin', and we also did forget to mention Illidan last time, but he's here too.
Would you say the Night Elves are like the Trolls is like the first race? Are the Night Elves like the second race? Or Highborn, I should say?
I mean, the Night Elves are definitely the second race. They actually descend from Trolls, so... Right. Trolls are the first race. Elves eventually, through this morphing at the Well of Eternity, do become the Elves. But yeah, I would call them the second race, and I would call them like the first true empire, because the other, like the Trolls, while they ruled, they had a bunch of like different clans and stuff that ruled across all of it, from like the Amani to the Gurubashi and stuff like that. But with the Night Elf Empire, it was just the Kaldorei. Well, and the Highborn, who saw themselves as above everyone else.
Oh, okay. Similar to like Blood Elves, I feel like. I don't know.
Actually, yeah, really similar, especially when we do kind of talk about the plight between the Blood Elves, which is why we did want to kind of set up this time frame anyway, so that when we do move back towards like the Third War and Warcraft 3 and stuff like that, that you kind of have an idea of how the Blood Elves even came to be all the way on the opposite continent from where they originated. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Tides of Lore on YouTube, or if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps the channel and ensures you won't miss a moment of this adventure. Now let's get started. So let's just hop into it. First things first, like we mentioned last time, the Highborn rule the Night Elf Empire from their capital of Zinajari. And like I said, they have their queen, who is supposed to be a super powerful mage, by the name of Azara.
I've heard of her.
And she actually, just to quickly prefix this, I did want to save this episode. I was wanting to do this episode last week, but I did want to save this one because I hadn't gotten through the War of the Ancients trilogy. And while she doesn't really do much throughout it, there is a scene at the end that very much does give you that idea that, oh yeah, no, yeah, she's a crazy powerful sorcerer. And we'll talk about it briefly as we get there, but first things first, we did mention last time the names Malfurion, Stormrage, and Tyrande Whisperwind. And they're kind of going to be our main characters for this story. Malfurion is, I mean, I'll just put it bluntly, he's the very first druid. He is being guided by you would either call them the wild gods, the trolls would call them Aloha, but he's being guided by the ancient keeper of the forest by the name of Cenarius. And basically, he's just like teaching him how to meditate. And Tyrande and Illidan, his twin brother, are also there. And they're all trying to learn how to do this. But nobody has the connection to the planet like Malfurion does. So through this, Malfurion begins to gain the ability to walk through an alternate realm of the Emerald Dream. And gains the ability to call upon the world itself for aid.
You said something that piqued my interest. Is Cenarius Aloha?
So that's the thing. These wild gods, which is what we'll just kind of call them, and Loa, they are the same thing. So Cenarius is the same as, yeah, it's just the culture that it comes from. The Loas are what the trolls worship, and the night elves worship basically the same thing, but they don't, I mean, they just have a different name for it.
Interesting.
So yeah, Cenarius, Malorn, all of these, Aviana, who most of these characters will see at the events of this War of the Ancients trilogy, they're all what the trolls would consider Loa and what the night elves consider wild gods.
Oh.
And most of the time in the books, they just call them demigods.
So Hakar is similar to Cenarius? Or no, he's a blood.
I guess so.
He's a blood god. Maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe we have to do something.
Well, I mean, So there's actually a demon by the name of Hakar, the Houndmaster, and he's in this series. And when they kept mentioning his name, I was like, is this like the demon or like not the demon, but the Loa Hakar? And no, they just decided to completely reuse that name. And you do actually see Hakar, the Houndmaster, if you play the Legion expansion. I believe he drops one of the mounts in Argus if you go and like kill him.
Yep.
To get back to our story, Malfurion begins to gain information through these connections to the Earth. The planet of Azeroth basically saying the Highborn are beginning to kind of become seduced by the powers of the Well of Eternity. The Night Elves had always drawn from the Well of Eternity. It's actually shown in this book that most of them can't even use magic without a connection to the Well of Eternity. So it's not like something they're always naturally attuned to. They gained knowledge through this. And through this knowledge, they became like the most powerful arcane empire on the planet. That's why they were so easily able to overcome the trolls and whatnot. But arcane power tends to be really, like I said, seductive. So when Azara decides, you know what, with Xavius coming to her and being like, yep, Sargeras is great, she's like, ooh, I like that idea. So she agrees to use this Well of Eternity to begin to bring demons into the world. And at first, it is just strictly that they're trying to strengthen the well to be a gateway, and the original demons that arrive being just like regular Fel guards and Doom guards and stuff. And one commander who we've seen before, a pit lord by the name of Manaroth, will arrive. And collectively, they will start working from inside this Highborn like section of Zinajari to summon demons and remake the world. And at first, when I knew about the War of the Ancients, I was assuming that like the Highborn didn't entirely know what was going on. Oh, they knew. They absolutely knew. It's even said that in the books, the Sentinels stand guard on the walls of like the capital city as the gates open and the demons come rushing out and start just slaughtering all of the non-Highborn. And they just watch. And it's even like as they go further and further down this kind of corrupted path, like Malfurion begins to gain the ability to basically like far see or like project his essence so that he can see things that he's not necessarily standing next to. And he begins to like actually look at these sentinels on the wall, and they're like smiling, and they're beginning to get like more and more joy out of this like cruelty and malice that's coming from the what I assume would be Fel corruption.
It's kind of messed up. Is Ashara leading them right now?
Yeah, I mean, Azara is pretty much always going to be leading them. I don't entirely remember when she takes over, but even without their like infinite lifespans that they eventually get, Night Elves still live for like 2,000 years or something like that. And if you're a powerful mage, I could definitely see you living longer than that.
Right.
So she's been in power for, I would guesstimate to be somewhere around like 1,000 years or a couple hundred at the very least. But yes, so she and all the Highborn, they completely lack empathy for any of the other Night Elves, and they are completely xenophobic towards any race that is not a Night Elf. So
They were
she
mages?
doesn't really care for them.
So
pretty much all of them were mages.
Did they outlaw arcane magic? Because I feel like in Classic there was no Night Elf mages, but in Retail there is.
We're going to cover that a bit more at the end of the story,
Sure.
just because that is where like we get to Nordor still and stuff like that. But yes, basically, with the events of the War of the Ancients, the Night Elves began super hesitant, super resentful towards arcane magic, so they would completely outlaw it by the time that the events of the War of the Ancients comes to its end.
It makes sense. I mean, they kind of went crazy with it,
Oh yeah, exactly. And that plot is actually the reason why Illidan is eventually imprisoned for 10,000 years, and we're going to talk about that. The Burning Legion is ripping its way across Kalimdor. It is just destroying all these Kaldorei lands time after time, and eventually, like I said in the last episode, there would be this resistance that would kind of begin to form. And the main leaders of this resistance, though they're not like the actual leaders, because even amongst this resistance, they're still like the nobles who see themselves as above all the other people. But mainly out of this keep and this location called Black Rockhold, or Black Rookhold rather, which you can see in the Broken Isles still. It's still a dungeon in the Legion expansion. And basically they kind of begin to form their resistance from here, but they, from the very start, are misguided. They get the impression that because all these demons are pouring out from Zinajari, that means they have actually imprisoned Azara. So their whole like war cry from this city to trying to get to Zinajari is like, let's go save Azara. Even though like Malfurion and other people know very well that, oh, Azara is actually causing this too.
Kind of a baddie.
Oh yes, definitely a baddie.
In both senses.
Exactly. So urged by the dreams of Cenarius, he would meet up with Tyrande, just to give you a quick like rundown, Tyrande is a priestess of Elune, and Elune is the goddess of the moon. At least one of them. Because I don't know if you guys know this, Azeroth actually has 2 moons. They just don't talk about the other one.
Really?
It's actually briefly mentioned that the Night Elves worship like the larger moon, which is what they consider Elune, and the Tauren worship the smaller one, which I believe is called like the Little Brother or something like that. And it's kind of where they get their connection to like the Earth Mother and stuff like that.
Very interesting. So I see a moon sometimes in the sky. So is there 2 moons you can see at a time, or is the other one not visible?
I think that in certain zones, both of them are visible, but I do believe that, yeah, for the most part, you only ever see like one.
Interesting.
So with that, they meet up with Malfurion's brother, Illidan, who, after he was unable to find the connection to the earth and to nature like Malfurion did, he ended up actually becoming a mage. He decided to learn the ways of the arcane the same way that most of his people had, and he kind of just has this mindset that, well, this is so much faster and I'm so much better at it that like obviously it must be better. And this is kind of Illidan's mindset for a really long time, of constantly seeking power at the extent of just making it easier for himself.
So Illidan dabbled as a mage.
And not only did Illidan dabble as a mage, he was actually one of the best mages that they had.
That's insane.
Eventually, the Highborn decide, well, we need more power being drawn to the Well of Eternity so that we can summon more demons. And they decide to, basically using a spell, to cut off the Well of Eternity from the rest of the Empire, so that it's strictly drawing power to summon Sargeras and the Legion. And even when this happens, like I said, a bunch of the mages that previously had studied in Zinajari and stuff like that, they can no longer use magic. None of them can. And even the ones that can like barely summon like a small flicker of light. But for some reason, Illidan is still so, I guess, powerful that he is able to do plenty of spells, and he even figures out other ways to have other like spellcasters channel through him. I believe this is even a quest that you can see in Legion, kind of, where you see Illidan being charged up back in the War of the Ancients by like a bunch of mages, and then you walk around as like a supercharged Illidan and just start crushing dudes.
So he was just like a highborn at that point. He didn't have the wings or anything, the muscles.
I assume he had a few muscles, but yeah, definitely no shirtless, no tattoos. That's gonna come later. Yeah, and he's just a night elf. Okay. Pretty much, I don't think we have really any like significant highborn that we know about, with the exception of Azara, Xavius, and one other that we'll talk about a little bit later. At this time, the Resistance is doing all that they can to try and push these demons back to the capital city and do what they think is the noble thing of rescuing their queen that they all love so much. And it kind of gives me a perspective of just how much everyone loves Azara, because even when she's their enemy, they love her. Even when you see the events of like the Warbringers Azara trailer, even at that time, they're like begging for her. They're like, please, my queen, save us, save us. They never have a doubt that she is going to take care of them.
Does she like, are they just simps, or does she have some sort of like enchanting magic? Like, because everything you're saying, like, obviously seems like she's doing bad things, and I don't know, maybe they're just so thirsty for power that they're going along with her. It's just very interesting to me that people are blindly following.
I do kind of agree, and it's definitely, it seems like she has some level of like an enchant over people, but the truth is that she's just like adored. Like, they renamed Zinajari. Zinajari wasn't its original name. It used to have like a different name before that, but they renamed it in honor of Azara, because that's just how much everybody in the Kaldorei Empire loved Azara.
Very interesting.
It is. It's kind of a cautionary tale about devotion, I feel like. So like we mentioned in the last episode, Deathwing would begin to brew his plot to create the dragon soul and to basically claim the power of the aspects for himself and kind of see himself as a god. And while I initially was curious and not sure how much like the Whispers actually have taken over him, after reading this War of the Ancients trilogy, you do get a few scenes where it's from Deathwing's perspective, and boy is crazy. Boy is fucking insane. Like, he's still very well spoken to other people, but inside his head is literally just constantly being like, they'll betray you. Like like you're walking through AQ40 and Cthulhu is literally in your ear being like, yeah, there is no hope. You're gonna die. And it's just nonstop having that play off in his head.
He's schizophrenic.
Basically. So yeah, he's completely losing it. He begins to convince the other dragon aspects to empower the dragon soul. At the same time, Malfurion actually reaches out to Cenarius, and he says, like, these demons are more powerful than any foe we have ever faced before. So I need you to go and call upon the other wild gods that you can find, any of the other demigods that you are willing to help us in this fight. And Cenarius at first is just like, we'll talk about it, but, you know, it might take a while. And even Malfurion's like, with these kinds of beings, like, this event could be over before they even decide what to do. So he's like, not necessarily banking on them, but he has made the call. So he gets back to the front lines to continue aiding in this war. And as the Highborn begin to descend even further into madness, so basically Malfurion comes up with this plan where he's basically going to like Farsi himself into the Well of Eternity's like little holding area in an attempt to magically break the spell that is keeping all the other mages from being able to use their magic. And he like eventually ends up getting caught by Xavius, and he gets shoved into a crystal for a while, and you know, it's kind of a little side story while we pick up with Illidan and Tyrande. But eventually he does manage to get free of this, and he faces down with Xavius for the first time. And I don't know how to describe it in any other way than Malfurion is like the GOAT. He is so powerful. Even as just like the first druid, he walks Xavius, and it is almost like comical because this isn't even the last time Malfurion's gonna walk Xavius like this.
It's crazy because eventually Xavius gets powerful. I mean, he was Legion when he was like a raid boss
Legion,
and stuff, or at least there was the Emerald Nightmare that was happening.
Yep. And Xal'atath in that expansion, if you have her as your artifact weapon, she'll actually say to you like, "Oh, look, Xavius always hopping from one master to the other," basically implying like, well, at first you were like a little bitch to the Legion, and now you're just a little bitch to the old gods.
He's just chasing power. He's following anyone
exactly.
who can give him more power. Well, but isn't that what fucking Azara's doing? But she was getting it from the well. It's like, you know.
Well, and also she eventually gets power from the old gods too.
Yeah, so it's like.
Yeah, I do find that a bit funny, but I mean, I don't think Xal'atath necessarily has. I mean, by the time we encounter Azar again, Xal'atath is freed, I'm pretty sure. So it doesn't really matter. But also what ends up happening is that there is like these, I guess just how to describe it is that a bunch of the leadership for those resistance basically just start dropping like flies. They're doing their best to fight off these demons and whatnot, but the demons always have something new. Like they always have like this mist that makes it super hard to see, and then Doomguards will just swoop in and kill all your dudes. Or they'll have like these boiling pots of oil that they'll just begin to dump on the armies of the Kaldorei. And when stuff like this happens, there are a lot of the leadership of this resistance, they die. Like the leader of the Temple of Elune, she dies. And she actually ends up making Tyrande the next head priestess, even though Tyrande is just barely becoming a apprentice, really. She's very recently initiated into the Temple of Elune. For some reason, the high priestess is like, no, you were set to be our next leader. I can feel it. Elune has guided me. There's most of, like, pretty much all the other priestesses, no one even questions it. So that just kind of goes to show how much everyone has faith in Tyrande and her ability and her connection with Elune. I guess there is one person who questions it. It is, I guess we'll put it this way. Another one of the leaders of the resistance also ends up dying, and another man who is kind of like, who doesn't hold any power at all, they begin to like give out orders and basically take command when the army is just shattered because of, I believe at this time, this is when we encounter Deathwing's betrayal. Essentially the dragons and the Kaldorei and all of them, they're marching to try and take back Zinajari. And like I said, Deathwing will decide to use the Dragon Soul to betray his allies, but he doesn't just betray the Dragonflights and kill a bunch of them. He ends up also just like going off the chain. He starts slaughtering demons. He starts slaughtering the Night Elves. He is just killing everybody. He's basically going on a tangent about how he's like, I will be the god of this world now. Me.
This is pre-Cataclysm. This isn't Cata because I remember him flying around, breathing fire, destroying Stormwind. This is his descent into madness.
Exactly. The Cataclysm cinematic actually gives us a really good kind of image of what it looks like, because later on, and we'll get to this, we do see Deathwing's body begin to really like tear apart and have these massive like lava fissures from him using the Dragon Soul so much. But he's obsessed with it. He begins to just like nonstop. It's really like the One Ring to him. And it's really like the One Ring in general, because eventually other characters will get a hold of the Dragon Soul, and even when they use it, they begin to have like they turn super aggressive, and their mind snaps at people like being like, oh, you just want the power for yourself. So it kind of makes sense why this is like the perfect artifact for Deathwing to just obsess over. But when he snaps and uses this and kills a bunch of the leadership for the resistance, a man by the name of Jared Shadowsong takes over. He's the man I mentioned who just starts leading the forces. He is a natural leader. People just, even though he has no rank, he begins to give orders, and people begin to come to him and accept those orders because he is, I guess, charismatic and seemingly a very brilliant strategic mind. The one person who I mentioned that was not a fan of Elune, or not a fan of Tyrande becoming the next high priestess, was Jared's sister, And she'll play a bigger role when we get to the Third War, but her name is Maiev Shadowsong.
Oh.
And she is also at this time a priestess of Elune.
I knew Shadowsong sounded familiar. I was going to ask you, like, wait, who? I swear I know that name. That's where I know that name.
I find it interesting because she does seem to start, like, in the story, she is a priestess, but also it's kind of weird because, like, in Hearthstone, she's a rogue, and then, like, so on and so forth. I guess I'm assuming that
she's a multi-class.
Just later on, she goes... She's dual classing, whatever.
Yeah, like,
I guess she's kind of like Anduin, right? Anduin.
He's a paladin,
and then kind of became a warrior, and now he's like a paladin.
No, he's a priest. He's a priest who wears plate armor.
This man's fucking cheating.
Yeah, no, he literally is. He's like, oh shit, higher armor? Yeah, let me just put that on.
He just sees that cannot be equipped, and he's like, I'm just gonna ignore that. So the resistance army is forced to retreat due to Deathwing's betrayal, and eventually Deathwing gets tired of just slaughtering everyone, and he goes to flee to where I believe this is when he goes to flee to High Mountain. They don't really give too much of a description where he goes, but he does flee to some sort of cavern, some sort of mountain somewhere that eventually people are going to go look for him because they're going to want to try and find the Dragon Soul. But also at this time, Tyrande is kind of scouting forward to try and get an idea of what they'll be facing when they make their way closer to Zinajari. I should mention at this point that they've gotten really close. They're basically kind of getting closer to the outskirts of the city itself. It's kind of surprising because despite how much the demons just nonstop seem to slaughter them, they're always pushing forward, and they seem to have this motivation just like, no matter what, we're going to take back our city.
I mean, if they don't, like, they lose everything, right? So it's kind of like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You kind of just have to send it.
And I guess that's their logic too, because no matter the losses, no matter how dire the situation seems, they push forward. And like I said, Tyrande will be scouting ahead, and she'll actually end up getting captured by Xavius, who, like we mentioned, was Ajara's like chief advisor. And he captures her because he knows that she's important to Malfurion, and she's important to Illidan. And I believe Sargeras, or either Sargeras or one of the other higher demons that they summon into the world, begins to tell them, like, yeah, you need to focus on Malfurion Stormrage, Tyrande Whisperwind, and Illidan Stormrage, because they're going to be your biggest problems moving forward. So they begin to, like, target them specifically.
Put a skull
especially
marker.
After...
You put a little skull marker target on him, you know?
That guy's a druid. He's a healer. Kill him.
Get him.
So she gets captured. She's taken to the capital of Zinajari, and she's thrown in a dungeon. And for a while, she refuses to eat. She refuses to do anything. And literally just the blessing of Elune herself keeps her sustained and keeps her alive without having to do any of this. Also at the time, Illidan becomes more and more jealous, because as he's like this super powerful mage, and he's even gaining more and more strength and more status amongst this resistance group, like he is the like main mage to one of the main leaders in this series, and after that guy dies, he kind of begins to question how he could get more power if the arcane is seemingly not going to be as reliable as he needs. So he makes the first of many poor decisions in his life, and he actually abandons the resistance to go to the gates of Zinajari and plead with Ajara and Xavius to basically give him fell magic. He's decided that arcane magic doesn't cut it, and he is going to find a way to get this superpower that the Legion seems to control. And I mean, he does. Basically, he's having a conversation with Sargeras, with Manaroth, and Xavius present, and they're like, we need to figure out a way to once again reinforce the portal to make sure that we can get our boy in. And they're like, ooh, I know. That dragon that just came by and slaughtered everybody had like this super powerful magical artifact. So how about I go get that super powerful magical artifact for you, and then we can reinforce the portal and you can come on through. And Sargeras is like, ooh, Omega Brain play, my guy. Here's a gift. And and he melts out Illidan's eyes. He scorches them with fell fire. And, you know, it just states like, Yeah, and Illidan screams, and his screams can be heard echoing throughout the palace. But by the time that this like little infusion is done, instead of having like these golden amber night elf eyes like a lot of his kin do, he has these burning green fell eyes. And now he's able to actually see non-corporeal things. He's able to see like traces of magic. He's able to see invisible things that wouldn't necessarily be visible to your average night elf. And this is how Illidan becomes like his first form that we kind of really see him in Warcraft 3. It's also what gives him his little fell tattoos. They do mention that he gains the fell tattoos from it.
So Illidan was in love with Tyrande, correct?
Yeah, and I guess that is something that I forgot to mention. A lot of this resentment comes from that fact. Like I mentioned, he's Malfurion's twin brother, and both of them grew up with Tyrande, and they both loved her. I mean, early on in their youth, they didn't really care for it, but as they got older, it's made clear that it's like, yep, they all have feelings for Tyrande, and Tyrande also has feelings for Malfurion.
So basically, was this the point where he made the choice power over love?
Yes, and he actually does approach Tyrande, and he's like, look how powerful I've become. Like, I can give you everything that you've ever wanted, Shoddy. And she's just like, ew.
So when he said that was pre-fell empowerment.
Yeah, this is basically the moment where he's like, well, fuck all this. I'm going to Janazari then. Because if I can't even, like, win the hearts of the people I care about, like, what's even the point? But so I should just get more powerful.
So he was losing his arcane empowerment, right?
I believe he still has it.
He still had it. So who was more powerful at this point when he had arcane? Was it Malfurion or was it Illidan?
Oh, Malfurion, no question about it.
Was Tyrande just attracted to the power, like how powerful Malfurion was, and that's why she was like, "You the low T brother." Like I'm going with Malfurion.
That big dog, bro.
Yeah, is that maybe what happened?
It is kind of that, but it's also a lot that Malfurion is level-headed. Malfurion is competent, and he is like understanding. He's compassionate, and these are all things that Illidan lacks. He's a vain character. He's, especially in this early trilogy, he's not really a likable character at all. Nothing like what we'll eventually get in Legion or anything like that. He's complete edgelord.
He's impulsive.
Very impulsive.
Can't control himself. Is he the younger brother? Do you know?
Well, they're twins,
oh, they're
so
twins.
They don't really have it. But also, he does hold a lot of resentment because when you're born as a night elf, most of them have like these glowing blue eyes, right? But Illidan was born and he had golden eyes. And one of the other people that has golden eyes is Azshara. And it's supposed to be the symbol when you're born with these golden eyes that you're destined for greatness. So from the second Illidan was born, he kind of always had this idea that he should be better than Malfurion, no matter what.
I mean, I don't want to like spoil things too far, but it does seem like Illidan is pretty damn powerful in retail. Like if we're talking current present day, who's more powerful, Malfurion or Illidan? Like who would win in a fight in present day? I don't know, man. You got any input on that?
I think that they really butchered the power scaling once we reached like Battle for Azeroth, because truthfully, there is no world where a Nathanos Blightwood would fight with Malfurion Stormrage. Mm-hmm. There is no world where that actually happened. Even if they try and give me that bullshit story where like he was empowered by the jailer, I don't care. There's no like we watch Malfurion in this, and Malfurion is just a nonstop badass. When he's on the front lines, he's literally like summoning entangling roots that just like crush a bunch of demons into the dirt and turn them into paste, and he is just like nonstop crushing people. And like I said, he walks Xavius. He it's like barely even a fight for him without him being like stuck captured. And like I said, this isn't even gonna be the first time that he does it. I mean, like I said, he's the one who ends up breaking the spell that keeps the Well of Eternity from giving everyone else power. And with that, like that is such an obscene level of power. Like the people that were empowering this portal were like Manaroth and like a bunch of other super powerful demons. Thank you for tuning in to Tides of Lore. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow adventurers. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you.
one more question, and then I'll leave you to it. Obviously, we know Illidan fought Arthas. If Malfurion fought Arthas, do you think Malfurion would win?
If Malfurion fought Arthas before he reached the Frozen Throne, I personally think that Malfurion would win. I think it's hard because even at that point, Illidan's been empowered by the Skull of Gul'dan, and he's had a bunch more fel magic that's been corrupted through him. But it really is hard to say because it's, again, the power scaling, it just is questionable. It seems more like to me that Malfurion is as strong as the writer needs him to be. And it's basically always that. Because if they need Malfurion to lose, then he loses. If they need Malfurion to win, then he wins. For the sake of the story going on, I'm sure that Malfurion would lose to Arthas as well. I personally think that from what we see in this series, he would win.
Interesting.
One of the Highborn that helped to free Tyrande Whisperwind was actually a man by the name of Dathramir's Sunstrider. And you might recognize that name as he is the founder of the city of Quel'Thalas. He takes this group of Highborn that do not agree with what Ajara is doing, and they're like, we're just going to go really far to the east.
Is he
related
to Kael'thas? Because isn't his last name Sunstrider?
Yes, he is Kael'thas' great-great-grandfather.
Oh.
Yep. So, yeah, they found the city of Quel'Thalas, and that is the beginning of the High Elven people, or the Blood Elves, that they'll eventually become. Once again, Malfurion comes face to face with Xavius, and you're like, wait, didn't Xavius just die? Yes. In between the first and the second books of the War of the Ancients Trilogy, you see Xavius kind of stuck in this, I assume it's the Twisting Nether, where he's just kind of stuck in this void, this purgatory. He doesn't know how long it's been. And then Sargeras comes to him, and he's like, yeah, you've been really loyal, and your punishment has been long enough, so I'm going to turn you into a demon, and then you can get back out there. And he does. And this is actually how we get the very first satyrs on Azeroth. Before this, there were no satyrs. And then after this, we get a bunch because Sargeras and Xavius and all of them, they begin to transform even more of these Highborn into the satyrs. So he comes across Xavius again. And Xavius is like, I won't let you get away with this transgression. And then Malfurion's like, sick, bro. And like I mentioned earlier, he just crushes him into a tree. And the fight's over. And it's literally just that. And that's where Xavius will remain until the events of Legion. And with this, they begin to also make a plan to figure out how they can close this Well of Eternity. So they're like, ooh, that crazy dragon that flew by had a crazy powerful artifact that could probably close this well if we got a hold of it. And Malfurion's like, all right, but I'm going to go use my magic powers. He basically walks the Emerald Dream. And like we mentioned briefly in the last episode with the aspects, the Emerald Dream is just this alternate reality of Azeroth, basically, where it's overcome with plant life. And it's described in the book as a land that was never touched by the mortal races. So he travels through this dimension to reach wherever Deathwing's at. And he finds out where Deathwing is hiding the Dragon Soul. And inside this layer, this is actually the first time we see Deathwing armoring up. It's not the scene that you see in the Cataclysm, because that's actually the second time that he's going to armor up. But it's a very similar scene where he's like losing his mind. And he's telling these goblins, he's like, I need you to put the armor on me now, right now. I can't handle it right now. And they're like, but sir, it's not ready. And he's like, no, I don't care. Just sear it into my flesh. And they do. They begin to take these red hot iron plates and weld them onto Deathwing's body to prevent his form from basically collapsing on itself. Because like I said, the Dragon Soul, as he was using it, it was beginning to rip his body apart. Even as he's like admiring it in there, it shoots off a beam that like rips a part of his jaw off. So Malfurion goes there. He goes with the help of some other characters that I've decided we're just going to skip for right now. But he gets into this hideout of Deathwings. And after fighting through a couple of these goblins, they do manage to locate the area where Deathwing was hiding it. And this is while he's getting the armor put on. So they're like, it's the perfect distraction. Like, he is screaming in ecstasy, to be honest. They mentioned that while Deathwing's having this, like, he's screaming out in pain, but at the same time, he just has a sick sense of enjoyment for the entire thing. And eventually Malfurion finds the artifact and he takes a hold of it. And as soon as he grabs it, he hears this screech of like 1,000 dragons dying. And at first it's like, oh, this is just like the residue of it killing all the dragons. But actually he realizes, oh, this was an alarm. So he, like, as soon as he does it, Deathwing's like, you fucking dare what? And he goes rushing through the caverns to try and reach him. Malfurion uses the Dragon Soul to just burrow straight through the mountain. He just builds it, like, he uses the power, and it basically builds them a staircase straight out of the mountain. And they do manage to escape. And as they're kind of getting out of the mountain and they're trying to make their way back to the rest of the resistance, they're ambushed. And they're ambushed by Illidan. And Illidan ends up taking the Dragon Soul from them and, you know, basically just claiming it to go save the world. He still has this idea that he is going to be able to outsmart Sargeras and eventually, like, just claim the power of everything for himself. So Illidan takes the Dragon Soul back to Zenajari, and
that's so crazy. I never knew Illidan interacted with the Dragon Soul like this. Like, I never knew.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know a lot of characters actually got a hold of the Dragon Soul like this. And it does make sense, because even when you do like the Well of Eternity dungeon in the Time Walking, you see the Dragon Soul like floating above the Well of Eternity, stabilizing the portal. And that is where Illidan takes it. He takes it back to the well. They do go through with their plan of using it to empower the portal. And the Well of Eternity begins to just expand so immensely and so large that eventually, like, we're getting real close. Sargeras is basically on the other side, my guy. And it's at this time that they kind of have this final stand at Zenajari, because the resistance has arrived, and with Tyrande leading the priestesses of Elune, and with Malfurion basically leading the wild gods, who would actually end up showing up to this fight, you have this massive clash between these demons, these dragons, these wild gods, and it is truly a war of the ancients. Because I guess something else I should mention is that the demons also summon one of their major demons, a guy who we'll see again by the name of Archimond. And we see him do some crazy magic. There's a scene where he literally just peels all the scales off of a dragon using magic, and then the dragon just falls from the sky. And it really kind of gives you a magical perspective of just how strong he is. And with that, we do get kind of a perspective of just how strong Azshara is. Because if they're able to kill these ancient deities, what Azshara does at the end here is kind of crazy.
And Archimond is just like an empowered Draenei, correct?
Yes, he was.
But why is he so powerful?
Because he's like an archdemon. He's like one of the supreme. I guess if you were to break it down, Sargeras is the commander, and he is like the lieutenant.
So, but is
like
he just
powerful
because he's empowered through Sargeras, or was he super powerful beforehand?
I mean, I have to assume that he was pretty powerful beforehand. He used to rule Argus with Velen.
But Velen's not that crazy, you know?
I mean, he is pretty crazy. He ends up purifying the Sunwell, so...
I guess.
But yeah, I mean, just when it comes to Fel magic, it just seems like, what if we took this character and we, like, quadrupled their power or whatever?
Well, I see why it's so tantalizing. Like...
Oh, yeah.
Like, because Velen, like, okay, sure, he cleansed a well. But this motherfucker gets as big as... What is that tree?
The tree, Nordrasil, yeah.
Yeah, and he's, like, literally about to, like, rip it down. And he's that big. It's just like that power. I can see why, you know, it's so tantalizing. Because I mean, he seems a lot more powerful than Velen, in my opinion.
And I definitely think that he is. There's no question about it. But it's also been so many years. Like, even like, we don't have an exact time frame of when Argus falls, but it's estimated that it's like 14,000 years before the Dark Portal. So
wait, so he's that old?
He's been at this for a while. Yeah.
Do Draenei live forever?
I don't know if they live forever. They seem to age, but they don't seem to age very quickly. They definitely have lifespans that are longer than elves.
That means Velen. I mean, he has white hair. He does seem like he's getting old. But if he's been around since then, that's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. And that also just gives you perspective of how long they ran from the Burning Legion and stuff like that. Literally, dude, thousands upon thousands.
You would be so tired, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's also why we have just so few Draenei by the time they actually hit Azeroth. So yeah, like I said, this massive clash between the wild gods, the dragons, the the demons, Archimonde, Manaroth, a bunch of huge names in the story. And this is actually when we see, again, just how powerful some of these demons are, because there is the father of Cenarius, the man who, or I guess the entity that created him. And it's a wild god by the name of Malorn. He's this massive stag with these glowing horns, and he is just like, he radiates eminence. And we don't get too much of a description of this fight, but at some point Malfurion looks over and he sees Archimonde has Malorn in a headlock, and he's like, well, that's not good. And then it gets even worse because Archimonde just snaps the neck of this deity.
What?
And kills it. Yeah. It is such a crazy feat of power, in my opinion. Like, to down a god, like, with a fucking wrestling move, my guy.
Because you play as Malorn in Legion. You do a high mountain quest, and it has you play as Malorn, and you're just, like, one-shotting everything. And it's just crazy that he, like, literally snapped Malorn's neck.
Yeah, and, I mean, before that, even you see Malorn just, like, ripping through the demons' ranks, too. Even Aviana, who is, like, this kind of smaller, she's, like, the goddess of the birds, like the deity of the flying creatures of the world. And she ends up getting impaled like a bunch of times and dying too. But before that, like, just slaughtering these demons. Kind of the aftermath of this fight is that you get a bunch of the wild gods dead. You do manage to push the Legion back to the Well of Eternity. And now, within inside, you have Malfurion trying to disable the portal. And eventually, through some help of other people like the dragon Crassus, and through an orc that we aren't going to mention because I think he should get his own story, Broxigar.
Ooh.
Yeah. Just to quickly step by it, Broxigar is like this orc that has survived so many battles, and he's one of the other people that's time traveled from the future, like we mentioned last time, but that story's a bit convoluted, so we're, like I said, saving it. But eventually he grows to have such an appreciation for all the allies that he's fighting around. Oh, something else I did forget to mention is that at this time, Jared Shadowsong also goes against the wills of most of the nobles and the night elves of the community, and he calls upon the Tauren, he calls upon the Earthen, he calls upon these other races that before all the night elves refused to even interact with. And they do end up showing up, and they end up helping him. And these are not just dwarves like we know them now. Is like literally the earthen that we would have in War Within. They still are described as having completely stone features and beards made of gems.
Yeah, that's them. Yeah, the women too.
Yep.
Dwarf women with beards.
If I ever see a dwarf without a beard, I'm gonna be upset. But yeah, with this time bought by this orc, Broxigar, who goes through the portal to the other side of the Twisting Nether and is just slaughtering demons with his axe that's been blessed by Cenarius, he eventually comes across Sargeras himself. And Sargeras is like, wow, that's cute. And he impales the orc and kills him. But just before he can get through, and I guess I should mention that Sargeras is like even a higher entity than pretty much anything that we've ever discussed. So he easily kills Broxigar, but something that is made very clear in the lore is that Broxigar actually manages to injure him. It's said that he has just gash on his leg when I think Crassus the dragon sees Sargeras, and it's just like, wait, there's no doubt about it, that injury was made by the axe. So Broxigar is basically the only character to strike, like the only mortal to strike down a god, or strike a god and injure them at all.
Was this axe a significant axe? Or was it just a normal...
Yes.
What axe was this?
I believe it's called the Axe of Cenarius, but it is literally a completely wooden axe that was manifested by Malfurion and then blessed by Cenarius to be able to be unbreakable and to cut through anything.
Okay, well, it makes sense that axe worked.
Oh, yeah, it does. It's just still surprising that a mortal would be able to strike a god.
Well, you're talking about an orc, you
know? Yeah. Never doubt the perseverance of the orcs, that's for sure. But as he buys them just enough time, Malfurion manages to unweave the portal that they're creating. It takes a while, but he does close the Well of Eternity's gate. And with that being the case, the well begins to kind of invert. And with that, a bunch of the demons that that came out begin to just get dragged back in. Like, as this is happening, Azshara goes up to Manaroth and is like, what the fuck is going on? And Manaroth's just like, oh, the plan is going to shit. And she's like, well, that's not acceptable. Why aren't you doing more about this? And, Manaroth's doesn't typically get spoken to like that. So he gets angry and he goes to strike Azshara. And it's said that without even moving a muscle, she just stares him down and he is unable to strike her. And it's said from his perspective that she on the outside doesn't appear like it, but her magical ability is on par or even better than Archimonde or Kil'jaeden. Wow. So that's kind of where we get the knowledge that, well, I guess she could be the most powerful mage that existed. But with that being the case, like I mentioned, the well begins to collapse in on itself. It begins dragging all these demons out, and Illidan, who kind of helped it, swapped backsides again at the end here, begins to collect these vials of water from the Well of Eternity. And he does this without other people noticing, but it is going to come back into play in just a second. So the well sucks all of these creatures in, and then eventually it just begins to kind of overwhelm with magic. And eventually, well, I mean, I don't know how long necessarily, like if it's days or it's weeks or whatnot, but the Night Elves are like, we need to move. Like Malfurion's been basically given a vision. He's like, we need to go somewhere now. We need to get out of here now. And they go to a location of high ground that they assume they'll be safe at for what the events are about to come. And they move to this place called Mount Hyjal. And we'll talk about that a bit more later, but they move there and the Sundering begins. This is basically the event that shapes Azeroth. As the Well of Eternity is just overwhelmed with power, it explodes. It shatters the land masses. I believe they say like 85% of the land just is incinerated. And then as that happens, like all the oceans begin to just draw in towards this area that the well was once in. And that's how we eventually get the Maelstrom. And that's how we eventually get, Northrend in the north and Pandaria in the south and the Eastern Kingdoms in the east.
Because it was like a Pangea continent beforehand, for anyone who doesn't know what Azeroth looked like. It was a one landmass, at least from what we know. Like, there could be a backside of Azeroth, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also the Dragon Isles somewhere out there, but yeah.
And then it became scattered, basically.
The world is now completely reshaped, and with that being the case, and I guess it's something else that we should mention, just because I do want to kind of go over it, is that there is this other city, and it was where the priestesses of Elune kind of were founded and came to being, a place called Suramar. And it would be one of the few cities of the Night Elf kingdom that's this close to Zinajari that will survive. And it's because when the demons were invading, they made this decision to just isolate themselves. Kind of like how you would see the bubble of Dalaran in WoW Classic. They were just like, we're just going to build a wall. We're going to keep these demons out. We're going to stay inside here. We're going to suck off our night well. And they do. And their city manages through this to survive both the invasion of the Legion and the Sundering, as they're set just kind of spiraling off into the ocean. And one part of this that does not get saved is actually the Temple of Elune itself, which does sink to the bottom of the ocean. And it's where Agewen will eventually decide to bury the Avatar of Sargeras and what will eventually become the Tomb of Sargeras. I guess something that I did forget to mention is that when the portal itself was exploding, Deathwing comes back. Deathwing loves his magical artifact, and he really wanted that dragon soul. He really, really wanted it. And even though all the whispers in his mind were telling him at this point, don't get it, do not, he's like, I'm getting the artifact. And it's like a scene where he's reaching so hard for the dragon soul that eventually he gets a hold of it. And as the Well of Eternity explodes, it just sends him rocketing off into the distance. And he's, also kind of a major reason of why the portal itself collapses. But yeah, so his body shattered even further. His mind shattered even further. He doesn't even get the artifact. It kind of goes spiraling off in the other direction. And he is kind of going to go rest until the events of the Second War and stuff like that, and the waking of Deathwing. And he's going to go and take a big fat nap in High Mountain, which is an area that will eventually become the Broken Shore.
Broken Isles.
Broken Isles, yeah. Back with the Night Elves. They make it to Hyjal just in time. The world has been reshaped, and they are now on top of this massive mountain that Aviana once used to rule over. There is this well of water at the top of Mount Hyjal, and it is just a pond, a lake, whatever you want to call it. And at first, that's all it is. It's a spot for them to get water from, to drink from, to live off of. And fucking Illidan, making more poor decisions, decides, the Well of Eternity Part 1 was just not enough. So he actually takes these vials of the water from the Well of Eternity and he pours them into this lake. And with that, it begins to empower this lake, basically turning it almost into a second Well of Eternity. And Malfurion catches him doing this, and he's like, Illidan, what have you done? Like, that was what let them into our world. And Illidan is just like, we need the power if we have any hope to defeat them. You're a fool, brother. And he's like, no, it is you who is the fool, brother. Mm-hmm. So with that, they kind of have a trial for him. Jared Shadowsong wants to have him killed, but Malfurion's like, please, let's grant him some empathy. He was still trying to help us as a people in the end, but he definitely needs to be punished. So I think we should have him imprisoned. And they're like, oh yeah, what do you think the sentence should be? 10,000 years.
Wow.
And that is exactly what happens. Illidan spitefully is imprisoned for 10,000 years. His guardian will be Jared's sister, Maiev, who will stand as his warden. And their story will come back in later as we hit TBC and stuff like that. But basically, after Illidan is imprisoned, the dragon aspects come to this new lake and they're like, we need to do something about this. Otherwise, more people are just going to come and draw from this lake and do the same shit over again. So we should do something. So they plant a seed, and the seed's imbued with like the power of life by Alexstrasza, and it's imbued with magic by Norsdomu, basically stating that as long as the tree stands, the Night Elf people, for all their sacrifices in this war, will never age. And then also Ysera shows up, and she's like, you guys have shown your loyalty to nature, and so long as any of you decide to follow the path of Cenarius, you will be able to walk the Emerald Dream. So she basically welcomes the Night Elves to be kind of the first race to walk the Emerald Dreams.
Ysera is the green dragon aspect, right?
Yes, she's the green aspect of, the Dreamer. She watches over that realm. She's very cryptic in these early books and whatnot. She doesn't really make a lot of sense most of the time, but I think this is a really, really cool way of describing how the Druids kind of get their connection with nature. But I guess with that, yeah, we kind of reached the end of the War of the Ancients. The Night Elves have pushed back the Legion for the very first time. Azeroth has been shattered. Tyrande now stands as the High Priestess of Elune, the leader of the Night Elfin people, and Illidan's in prison. So with all that, yeah, I think that's about all we have to talk about today. And next time, I believe we're going to move on to trying to start up the events of the Third War for the next episode. Any thoughts or opinions on this episode, Tim?
I liked it, man. There was a lot of key characters that we talked about. Maiev, or however you say it. Illidan.
Maiev, yeah.
Malfurion, Tyrande. Like, these are so many key players that you see in later expansions.
Even like the lesser known characters like Jared, there's a lot of people who know who Jared is, but he's still a character all the way up to like BFA, I believe, that actively influences the story of WoW.
And it's good. I learned a lot of things. Like, I didn't truly know how Illidan, became, the first demon hunter. So it's cool to just, learn about.
I was surprised by how many of the character stories cross over. Like, I didn't know that Malfurion ever held the Dragon Soul. I didn't know Illidan ever held the Dragon Soul. I knew who Xavius was, but I didn't know he fucking died twice and then became, corrupted by the Emerald Dream after that. It's like, all of this stuff is so interesting for how they set up specifically the Legion expansion. It gives such depth to all of the stories that we go into there. And obviously also what leads into the Reigns of Chaos, or the Age of Chaos, and the Third War. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. Your guys' support truly means the world to us. If you're interested in hearing more, we have our full show on YouTube and Spotify, new episodes dropping every Tuesday. I also want to take this moment to give a special thank you to Fantasy Lo-Fi for providing the music for this episode. You can find them on YouTube at Fantasy Lo-Fi or on Spotify under Bits and Hits. Be sure to show them some love as their music does truly bring this journey to life. Once again, thank you for joining us on Tides of Lore, and we will see you next week.